So as we're about a month away from Battlefield 1's worldwide release, I realized that not only me, but a bunch of other people do not really know the history of World War I. Now, when I was a kid, they didn't really teach us about World War I in school. They literally kind of skipped it and then talked about, World War II and Vietnam. And they like to talk about, Rome and, the Caesars and 300 and all that good stuff, the Spartans, Greece. They like to talk about all that stuff, but they never really covered World War I. And, I definitely, took my time to try to scour the internet to try to find World War I documentaries in preparation for Battlefield 1's release, so I could at least know what's going on in the campaign. And, that they will probably put historical things in, most likely are going to put historical things in the story mode, so I can at least know what the fuck is going on. So when I see something, I can point it out and be like, oh, I know what happened here, and I know what's going to happen as this story progresses. So I looked at all the documentaries, and I seen a few of them that were good. There was a couple of them on the National Geographic channel, but they didn't really cover, they didn't have any footage of, the battles taking place. They just really only had footage, because obviously it was in 1914. They didn't really have any footage of the fighting itself. They just had, troops standing around, reloading guns, shooting cannons, and that's pretty much it. They didn't have any actual footage of any fighting. So, there are a few that were made by the BBC that are like dramatizations, not actual real shit, but basically acting of World War I, fighting in the trenches and stuff like that. But the best thing that I found is a podcast by Dan Carlin. It's called Hardcore History. And what you want to look for is when you subscribe to the podcast or whatever, it doesn't cost any money, obviously, because it's a podcast. You go and look for Blueprint of Armageddon. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're like, I don't want to listen to a podcast. I want to watch an actual documentary footage. But the problem is there is really no footage that is really that good. There's just, like I said, people standing around shooting mortars, and that's pretty much it. There's no, real good narration of the war. Now, with this podcast, it's almost like watching the war, play out in your head. And you already have, you've seen footage of what it looked like. So you can basically just imagine, what is going on. Now, I know people are like, get the fuck out of here. But listen, Dan Carlin breaks it down so well that you can't even, it doesn't even matter that it's a podcast. That's how good it is. He breaks down exactly how it started. It started with an assassination of the Duke of Hungary or something like that, and then it, by some, some Serbian rebels basically, and then it breaks down how Germany invaded Belgium because they couldn't get past what was, later to be called the Maginot Line in World War II. So they invaded a neutral country. And I've only gotten through the first episode, and there's 4, and they're like 3 hours apiece. So he breaks down everything. He breaks down, when they had the first, I guess it would be like, war with, not really a war, but like, battle with Belgium, the Belgian people. They the Germans were getting their ass kicked because the Belgians were dug in, but then all of a sudden the Germans brought in the heavy guns. They brought in these cannons that were so powerful and so big at that time. You had to be 3 football fields away and have to have your mouth open so it wouldn't blow your eardrums out when they fired it, and they had to fire it electronically. It was insane. That's how big the gun was. They had to, when they showed up with the cannon, they had to pour concrete. You know what I'm saying? They had to pour concrete, and it weighed like, I think he said 30,000 pounds. How ridiculous is that? It had to be assembled. They couldn't move it as one giant piece. When they showed up, they had to assemble it, pour concrete to get it to stick into the ground, so that way when it fired, it didn't fucking blow back and fly across the ground. That's how massive, this First World War was. And it really breaks down, this was the first war where we had, armies had good equipment. Like, they had machine guns, they had submachine guns, This was the First World War. That's why, you know, when people think about the First World War, you know, before even the Battlefield 1 beta came out, I was like, or even, you know, when it was announced, I was like, what are they gonna be running around with muskets? I've never heard like what's gonna happen until you do your research. So that's why I'm telling you, if you're getting Battlefield 1, for those people who are getting Battlefield 1, you know, to play multiplayer, obviously play the story mode. Some people don't play the story mode, but to at least get the immersion of what was going on back then, because that's what I like to do. Whenever a World War II game would come out, I would always go back and watch, you know, Band of Brothers, fucking The Pacific, and I go back and watch fucking, you know, Saving Private Ryan, to get into that mode of, damn, we gotta defeat the Germans, we gotta defeat the Japanese, you know what I'm saying? So for those people who pre-ordered Battlefield 1 and who cannot wait, like I can't wait for the game to come out, you want to go check out Dan Carlin's podcast. And again, it's called Blueprint for Armageddon, and there's like 4 or 5 parts, if I'm not mistaken. So go check that out if you're getting Battlefield 1. I'm telling you, once you get through the first episode, you're like, dude, I can't. The way he ends it, that shit is like a fucking television episode. You're like, god damn. You're like, damn, I can't wait to binge watch this shit, because it's like Netflix. I gotta watch part 2. I gotta watch part 3. And before you know it, you're like 8 hours deep into the day, and you're like, oh my god, this is tremendous. And the way he breaks it down, like I said, is so on point. And so he breaks down, you know, he talks about how the German Kaiser, which is basically German for Caesar, you know, he talks about private meetings and, you know, first-hand accounts of people that were there and the writings of what happened in those meetings leading up to the war and during the war. Dude, it's crazy. It's off the chain, son. This World War I shit was legit. It was a bloody war. He talks about when the Germans, before the, like I said earlier, the big cannon showed up where they had to pour concrete to shoot them so they wouldn't fucking explode and flip, and they had to stand 3 football fields away. He talks about how the Germans' first attempt to, like, basically siege these forts where the Belgians were held up in and trying to defend their country, that they were running up the hills bayonet style, like bonsai style, like the Japanese back in the day. And he was talking about how people never learned their lesson from that. They continued trying to bonsai even into the next World War II. That they tried to do that crap. So he was talking about how the Germans were just running up the hill and they were just getting gunned down by machine gun fire, and they were getting killed, and they were the piles of bodies were stacked up so high they didn't know if they had to send people out there to risk their lives to move the German bodies because they were obstructing their view, or to just say fuck it and then just shoot through the bodies and make holes, you know, with the machine gun fire. It was a bloody fucking war. And when you imagine, because there's been so many war movies from World War II, you can imagine how it was back then, you know. And there's also World War I documentaries where you can see how people were dressed and how people were looking. And obviously with the Battlefield 1 beta experience, you know how pretty much how it looked on the beta, you know, especially with the alpha when they were fighting the Germans. You kind of have an idea of how it was looking and how you know, violent the war was. So with that being said, for those people who, like I said, pre-ordered Battlefield 1 or bought Battlefield 1 and they're ready for the game to come out, go check out this podcast rather, and download it. It's free. You know, subscribe on a podcast app, whatever one you use. Just type in Hardcore History. You don't even have to type in Dan Carlin, and it'll pop up. And you just go scroll down and start listening to the episodes. It's fucking crazy. And the way he explains it, like I said, and breaks it down, he's really fucking good. So with that being said, I hope you enjoyed the video. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and I'm out of here. Peace.